Paul never once mentions the virgin birth. For 40 years after Jesus' death, the idea of his miraculous birth doesn't appear in any Christian writings. The Ebionites, a group of early Jewish Christians, did not believe in the virgin birth of Jesus. Matthew's Gospel began with chapter 3 without any reference to a miraculous birth. Do you believe that Jesus was born through a miraculous union between Mary, mother of Jesus, and the Spirit or the breath of God? If you are Muslim or Christian, then you probably do. Do you also then believe that Dionysius, the Greek god, Romulus, the founder of ancient Rome, and Plato, the Greek philosopher, do you believe that they were all born through a miraculous birth between God and a human female? If not, why not? Do you know that it has been said that all these figures have been born through a miraculous birth between a human female and God? Why do you believe in one and not all the others? Let's have a look at what the Bible and the Quran say about this matter. The Quran says in Surah 19, verse 19 and 20, "I am only a messenger from your Lord, sent to bless you with a pure son." Mary, mother of Jesus, then wondered, "How can I have a son when no man has ever touched me, nor am I unchaste?" The Quran then confirms the how in Surah 21, verse 91 by saying, "She who guarded her virginity, we breathed into her of our spirit, and made her and her son a sign to the world." The Quran clearly claims the miraculous birth of Jesus through a spiritual interaction between God and a human female. Similarly, the Bible makes the same claim in the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke, confirming the miraculous birth of Jesus through the union of a mere human and the Holy Spirit of God. If you truly believe in that claim, truly think it is historically true, not just mystically or metaphorically speaking, but an actual event that historically took place in the past, then I really need to understand your perspective and how you make a stand on beliefs. How do you verify truth and reality? If something happened in the past, historically speaking, not in an ethereal sense or a mystical metaphor, no, something really took place in reality and happened as an actual event, then in that case, it is not up to the individual to have faith in it or not. It is not a mere belief that I think that Nero was a Roman emperor or that Abraham Lincoln was an American president. Although I didn't live at that time of these events, I don't consider my stand a matter of faith or belief. These are actual historical events, and there are reasons to believe a historical event took place or not, something that happened for real or it was made up. So if you agree, I want to ask you a question, and please take a moment to consider your answer. And it doesn't matter if you are Christian or Muslim, because both faiths believe in the immaculate birth of Jesus. What makes you believe in that claim, as mentioned in your holy book, be it the Bible or the Quran? Don't take that as an attack on your faith or your book. Rather, please view it as an inquiry of reasoning and critical thinking. Perhaps we all need to believe in the miraculous birth of Jesus if it is a true historical event. Could you lead the way there? Let me clarify the important context for this thought process. I am well aware that the miraculous birth of Jesus is taken as a matter of faith. After all, miraculous births do not occur naturally, by definition, or it wouldn't be called a miracle. I get that. But that would only be applicable and acceptable if Jesus was the only person who was allegedly born miraculously through the union of a human female and the Spirit of God. However, regardless of your personal faith as a Christian or as a Muslim, that claim of a miraculous birth is not just unique to Jesus alone. And I'm not talking about just mythological figures here. I'm also talking about real historical figures. who were allegedly born through a miraculous process. Let me tell you why, for me personally, the story of Jesus' miraculous birth is a total myth, in my opinion. It is not about discrediting the Muslim faith or the Christian faith. For me, it is just about looking into the history, the evidence, how the story came to be, and how it made its way to the Bible and from it to the Quran. Let me explain my reasons and my logic into why the immaculate birth narrative cannot be accepted even on the account of miracles. If the story were unique, if Jesus was the only one who had been claimed to have been born of an immaculate union between a woman and God, then you could argue that it's a matter of faith or a miracle beyond human understanding. In such case, reason is not needed. But when multiple figures throughout history are said to have been born of miraculous unions, you can't simply dismiss them all while holding on to the belief in one virgin birth, that is of Jesus, without using reason why to accept one and reject all others. In that context, let's consider the question: why do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin named Mary, but not that Plato was born of a virgin named Praxione, or that Dionysius was born of Persephone? Why do you reject the story of the Greek god Attis, who was born of a virgin named Nana, even though his story also includes a December 25th birth and resurrection after death? The real issue isn't just the similarities between these stories. It's the foundation you're using to believe that Jesus' immaculate birth is a fact while dismissing all the others. What is it about Jesus' birth that makes it more believable to you while choosing to deny all other miraculous births? The truth is, you need to understand where this concept of a miraculous birth for Jesus originally came from, and how it infiltrated Christianity and eventually making its way into Islam and the Quran. Let me walk you through the history of how this story came to be in the first place. There is no disagreement that Jesus came from a Jewish background and was a teacher and a preacher within Judaism. Whether you believe him to be a prophet if you are a Muslim, or a God or son of God as a Christian, that's not our concern here. But he was undeniably rooted in Jewish traditions, practicing kosher, celebrating Passover, and attending the temple. Jesus lived around 2,000 years ago and either died or ascended around the year 30 AD. The earliest Christian writings we have are from Paul the Apostle. And for 30 years after Jesus' birth, there are no other Christian writings apart from Paul's letters. What is interesting is that Paul never once mentions the virgin birth. Despite the fact that such an event would be a monumental, miraculous occurrence, Paul remains silent on it, never mentions that Jesus was born without a human father. Could it be that this story had not yet entered the Christian doctrine? Let's look even closer. Much later, around 60 AD, we finally get the first gospel, the Gospel of Mark. And yet, even here we find no mention of a virgin birth. For 40 years after Jesus' death, the idea of his miraculous birth doesn't appear in any Christian writings, despite the importance of such a massive event and miracle. It is only in the Gospel of Matthew, written around 70 AD, that we encounter the first mention of an immaculate birth. But even this account is questionable. And let me explain why before you dismiss the argument. You surely heard of Bart Ehrman, one of the most renowned scholars in New Testament's textual criticism. He points out in his book Lost Christianities that the Ebionites, a group of early Jewish Christians, did not believe in the virgin birth of Jesus. To them, Jesus was born naturally from a union between Mary and Joseph. Yet they still believed in Jesus. What's even more fascinating is that the Ebionites used the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, yet their version of Matthew must have lacked the first two chapters, the ones that mention the virgin birth. So for them, Matthew's Gospel began with chapter 3 without any reference to a miraculous birth. This is why we cannot take the Gospel of Matthew as evidence for the appearance of the immaculate birth of Jesus.
The gospel that the Ebionites used, one of the gospels that they used, was a gospel that was very much like our Gospel of Matthew. This was a book that was used by the Ebionites, although they appear to have modified the Gospel of Matthew because they eliminated chapters 1 and 2, which are the two chapters that describe Jesus' virgin birth.
This led scholars to believe that the virgin birth story didn't make its way into Christian doctrine until around 85 AD with the Gospel of Luke. Why then near the end of the first century, and why Luke specifically? This is where things get more interesting. By the end of the first century, Christianity had almost entirely faded from Jewish society. The destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in year 70 ended the influence of the early Jewish Christian movement, and Christianity began spreading among non-Jews, particularly in the Greco-Roman world. Luke is the follower of Paul. Paul, who says about himself in 1 Corinthians verse number 20 that he acted in this way, I quote, "To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews, and to the Gentiles I became like one of them to win the Gentiles." This is simply a person who utilizes the culture and tradition of each group to make it more appealing to them so he can win them over, according to his own words. Now, keep in mind that in the Greek culture, the idea of a virgin birth or a miraculous birth was not unique or outlandish. Many gods and demigods were said to have been born of a union between a human female and the touch or the spirit of God. Great leaders of Rome were also said to have divine origins. For example, Perseus, the Greek hero, was born from a young woman, Danae, who was impregnated by Zeus in the form of golden rain. That's how she got pregnant. Romulus, the founder of Rome, was also said to have been born of a virgin who was consecrated to a temple, much like Mary. And Augustus Caesar, Rome's first emperor, was claimed to be the son of the god Apollo, conceived when his mother was visited by a serpent from god Apollo. Even Plato, the great philosopher, in some accounts about his life, was said to have been born from a young woman impregnated by god Apollo. Do you see the pattern here? Virgin births and young women touched by God were not considered unique or particularly one-offish in the ancient world. They were part of the narratives that surrounded many great figures. And it wasn't just Greek culture. In Zoroastrianism, one of the oldest monotheistic religion, the prophet Zoroaster was said to have been born of a virgin who conceived him through a divine ray of light. Zoroaster's birth was foretold before his coming, and his arrival was awaited by the priests of his time, known as the Magi. Sound familiar? Remember the three wise men, the Magi, who visited Jesus upon his miraculous birth? Yup, it's a retold story. The Gospel writers took this myth and applied it to Jesus, casting the Zoroastrian Magi as visitors to Jesus' birth. The Christian story also absorbed elements from Mithraism, a Persian religion that became popular in the Roman Empire in the 1st century. Mithra, too, was said to have been born on December 25th, witnessed by shepherds who came bearing gifts. Again, this sounds a lot like the Christmas story we are familiar with today. And it is a known fact, the church actually doesn't deny it, that the chosen date of Jesus' birth as 25th of December was copying Mithra's birth date. So as Christianity spread through the Roman world, it adopted and absorbed these pre-existing myths and narratives. Thus, the virgin birth, which didn't exist in the earliest Christian writings, became part of the faith. By the end of the 1st century, it was a core belief in Christianity, and that's the same core belief that Islam and the Quran copied as it is from Christian traditions. At this point, someone might say, well, you're wrong, Adam. The virgin birth was prophesied in the Old Testament, in the book of Isaiah, 700 years before Jesus was born, and it preceded the Greco-Roman myths. I will leave this argument out for now, because it deserves a video on its own. But my short answer for now is this. Isaiah wasn't talking about Jesus and was certainly referring to another woman, not Mary, mother of Jesus. This particular prophecy that you're talking about or you're referring to was never about Jesus or Mary. But if you want me to make a video about this particular so-called prophecy, please let me know in the comments. The final conclusion is this. The idea of a virgin birth wasn't originally part of the Christian belief. It only entered the faith as it spread through the Greco-Roman world, where such myths and stories were already widespread. So Christianity borrowed it to appeal to the Gentile world. And just like Christianity, Islam later adopted the same myth without understanding its origins, simply repeating the Greek-influenced gospel story in the Quran. So to wrap up, I will leave you with this question. Since there are many figures said to have been born of virgins or young women and a union with the divine, why believe in just one and reject all the others? Isn't it more reasonable to either accept them all as true or to conclude that none of them really happened, including the stories in both the Bible and the Quran? Think about it.